The Elizabethan age of discovery was driven by the swashbuckling exploits of a few Englishmen. Together, such men as Hawkins, Frobisher and Drake expanded the borders of the known world. But at their heart, guiding this expansion, were others. Renaissance men of learning and far sight, audaciously planning an empire for Britain. Prince of such men was Sir Walter Raleigh. The tyrannical reign of Henry VIII left England weak. In his wake, first Edward and then Mary attempted to fill the power vacuum. However, their rapid succession allowed civil unrest to flourish unchecked. Under Mary, Bloody Mary as she became known, the persecution of Protestants caused deep religious conflict across the country. Worse, this Catholic queen spoke openly of handing her throne to the Spanish king. Walter Raleigh was born between 1552 and 1554 at the height of this period, now known as the Marian persecutions. His family, which was devoutly Protestant, suffered accordingly. During one disturbance, his father, a Devon farmer, was nearly hanged by a Catholic mob. As a result, his son learned to hate both Catholics and Spain, both vividly recalled in tales of the cruel Spanish Inquisition. After Queen Elizabeth came to the throne in 1558, the country began to settle into a period of calm. Slowly, trade and industry began to recover. Rid of the distractions, Englishmen began to explore the seas once more, defying Spanish dominance. Raleigh was the younger of two sons, but through family connections, he was able to further himself adequately. As a young man, he had the opportunity of joining ships belonging to relatives, such as the famous Drakes or the Grenvilles, and learning the ropes on trading expeditions. But instead, he opted to go to Oxford to study. Although his wit made an immediate impression there, John Aubrey relates, in his brief accounts, that Raleigh was not a wealthy student.
In his youth, for several years, he was under straits for want of money. I remember that Mr. Thomas Child of Worcestershire, he told me that Sir Walter borrowed a gown of him when he was at Oxford. They were both of the same college, which he never restored, nor money for it.
At this time, one of Raleigh's cousins married a Huguenot leader, Count de Montgomery. Whether for reasons of poverty or duty, he soon left Oxford to fight with him in France against the Catholics. He remained in France for 4 years. There, experience of war at its most savage dampened his romantic streak. As a soldier, he came to appreciate the need for ruthlessness and strong leadership. When he returned to England, he was a grown man.
He was a tall, handsome and bold man, but damnable proud. Old Sir Robert Hardy of Brampton Bryan Castle, who knew him, would say that it was a great question who was the proudest, Sir Walter or Sir Thomas Avebury, but the difference that was judged on Sir Thomas' side. He had a most remarkable aspect. An exceeding high forehead, long-faced and sour-lidded, a kind of piggy eye. His beard turned up naturally.
On his return to England, he again took up study at Oxford. There he also resumed an interest in duelling and brawling.
In his youthful time was one Charles Chester that often kept company with his acquaintance. He was a bold, impertinent fellow, and they could never be at quiet for him. A perpetual talker. He made a noise like a drum in the room. So, one time in a tavern, Sir Walter Raleigh beats him and seals up his mouth, that is, the upper and nether beard, with hard wax. From him, Ben Jonson takes his Carlo Buffone or jester in Every Man Out of His Humour.
He made little progress at Oxford before he found a new distraction. Raleigh's half-brother, Humphrey Gilbert, was eager to explore the northwest Atlantic, looking for a passage to China. Such a route, avoiding the dangers of the Magellan Straits and the Spanish-dominated south, would be invaluable to trade. The best minds of the day, including the mathematician and astrologer John Dee, backed Gilbert's plans. When Gilbert sailed, Raleigh joined his fleet of 10 warships in command of the Falcon. But the adventure turned into a fiasco. 3 of the ships deserted to go pirating. The rest were driven back to port by storms. Raleigh himself encountered a Spanish squadron, but his ship barely survived. For infringing the Queen's official policy of friendly relations with Spain, Gilbert and Raleigh were ordered, in disgrace, to Ireland. There, they were charged with putting down the Desmond Rebellion, which was being backed by Spain and Italy. There, Raleigh again saw fierce conflict. For a while, he was so brutalized by his experiences that he became careless of his life. He led a number of brave but foolhardy attacks before deciding that the English strategy was wrong. Vocal as ever, he was summoned to London to explain his argument to the Privy Council. At court, Raleigh was elegant and persuasive. He immediately caught the eye of the Queen, and from then on, his fortune began to change. Certainly, he knew how to play up to the Queen. The well-known story of how he placed his cloak on the wet ground for her convenience is, in fact, true. He was soon given a commission and ordered to return to Ireland. But the Queen required him to remain in London, so he was allowed to sell the commission at a profit. Many other privileges came his way, and soon he became rich. As one observer, Sir Robert Naunton, remarked, "He was one that it seems fortune had picked out of purpose to use as her tennis ball, tossed up from nothing and to and fro to greatness." But Raleigh was not unaware of the dangers of courting such a creature as Queen Elizabeth. The situation is summed up by another well-reported story in which Raleigh scratched a line of verse upon a palace window. Below it, the Queen added her own. "Fair would I climb, yet I fear to fall. If thy heart fail thee, climb not at all." Raleigh became the Queen's favourite. Over the next 10 years, he used his position to serve England as well as he could. He strove to further the understanding of navigation, shipbuilding, and encourage exploration. As an example of good shipbuilding, he constructed the Ark Raleigh, later named the Ark Royal, according to his 6 requirements.
She should be strong-built, swift, stout-sided, should carry her guns all weathers, hull and trywell, which we would call a good sea ship, and stay well when boarding and turning on a wind is required. We find by experience that the greatest ships are least serviceable, go very deep to the water, and are of marvellous charge. Besides, they are less nimble, less manageable, and seldom employed. Grande navio, grande fatiga, saith the Spaniard. A 600-ton ship can carry as good an ordnance as a 1,200-ton ship. And the lesser will turn her broadside twice before the greater can wind once.
The importance Raleigh placed on good English seamanship was not without reason.
For whosoever commands the sea commands the trade. Whosoever commands the trade of the world commands the riches of the world, and consequently, the world itself.
Raleigh, forbidden by the Queen to sail himself, sent out 2 reconnaissance ships. These landed in North Carolina, near the island of the Roanoke Indians. Their captains reported that the land was rich in tropical fruits, timber, and minerals. Although diplomatic relations with Spain were breaking down quickly at this point, Raleigh placed his cousin, Sir Richard Grenville, in charge of a fleet which sailed in 1585. Grenville landed colonists and supplies in Roanoke. Included among the colonists were the scientist Thomas Harriot and the artist and surveyor John White. Under Governor Ralph Lane, these men were to plan and record the development of the colony. 5 years earlier, Francis Drake had returned from his voyage around the world, his ship, the Golden Hind, bursting with treasure. Reports from Roanoke suggested that Raleigh's colony was its equivalent in natural products. Governor Lane wrote,
"We have discovered the Main to be the goodliest oil under the cope of heaven, so abounding with sweet tree, that brings such sundry rich and pleasant gums, grapes, and such greatness, yet wild, as France, Spain, nor Italy have no greater. So many sorts of apothecary drungs, such several kinds of flax, and of kind like silk, the same gathered on a grass as common there, as grass is here."
To this day, John White's watercolours of potatoes and tobacco can be seen in the British Museum. But the colony, renamed Virginia by Raleigh in honour of the Queen, soon floundered. Crops failed. Then there were disputes with the Indians over food. Lane saw fit to kill their leader and his men in a preemptive raid on their village. When Sir Francis Drake arrived there after his raid on the West Indies, the colonists were eager to escape and returned with him back to England. Raleigh learned the lessons of this failure. His next expedition, in 1588, was sent to Chesapeake Bay. There families were settled and their ships returned to England for supplies. Tragically, these supply ships were delayed by the sailing of the Spanish Armada. When they did return, 3 years later, Raleigh's settlers had disappeared. Raleigh lost a great deal of money in these ventures, but in laying such groundwork for the future settlements, he demonstrated, not for the first time, how sound his foresight was. Raleigh's part in routing the Armada of 1588 was comparatively small. He was still forbidden by the Queen to sail. Instead, he led a land force on first English, then Irish soil, which was to repel any attempt at an invasion. No such attempt was made by the battered Armada. Raleigh did sail with Drake's counterattacking expedition in 1589. But despite the burning of Vigo and extensive damage to Spanish ships, the venture was considered a failure. Worse, during the action, Raleigh quarrelled with Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, who had become his main rival at court. He had already been forbidden by the Privy Council from fighting a duel with Essex. On his return to England, he tired of the demands of this constant rivalry and retired to his estate in Ireland. He resumed his studies and almost certainly began to plan for a future expedition to Guyana, which he had lately heard of. But to finance any such ventures, he needed the Queen's favour. And so, while continuing his writings on navigations and shipbuilding, he sent flattering verse to the Queen.
If Cynthia were a queen, a princess, and supreme, keep these among the rest, or say it was a dream. For those that like, expound, and those that loathe, express meanings according as their minds are made over, more or less. In writing what thou art, and showing what thou were, Add to the one disdain, to the other but despair. Thy mind of neither needs, in both seeing it exceeds.
Raleigh's attentions coincided with his rival Essex's marriage to Frances Walsingham. Jealous, the Queen banished Essex and welcomed Raleigh back in his place. Raleigh was appointed Vice Admiral of an expedition to capture the Spanish treasure fleet off the Azores. But at the last moment, the Queen again prevented him from leaving her. He was replaced by Sir Richard Grenville, who sailed in the Revenge. However, he pressed to be allowed to sail to the Azores, and the Queen eventually relented. Although she replaced Raleigh as its leader again, this time with Martin Frobisher, he sailed with it anyway. By now, he had good reason to want to impress the Queen with some great feat, such as the capture of a treasure fleet. Raleigh always had a roving eye, and it was often said that he dearly loved a wench. Among John Aubrey's recollections is one with particular bearing in this matter.
Oh, he loved a wench well. And one time, getting up one of the maids of honour up against a tree in a wood, 'twas his first lady, who seemed at first boarding to be something fearful of her honour, and modest. She cried, "Sweet Sir Walter, what do you ask? Will you undo me? Oh nay, Sir Walter, sweet Sir Walter, Sir Walter." At last, as the danger and the pleasure at the same time grew higher, she cried in the ecstasy, "Swisser, Swatter, Swisser, Swatter." She proved with child. And I doubt not but that this hero took great care of them both, as also the product was more than an ordinary mortal.
The lady was Elizabeth Throckmorton, one of the Queen's maids of honour. Raleigh secretly married her, and she bore him a child. Only a great success at sea could placate the Queen's feelings of double betrayal when she inevitably found out. The expedition missed the Spanish treasure fleet. In desperation, Raleigh sent the expedition in search of other prizes and returned to England. There, he and his new wife were confined to the Tower of London. Fortunately, not long after, his expedition returned to Dartmouth with a captured Spanish carrack, the Madre de Dios. It was the richest prize ever captured. Raleigh was released in order to secure the Queen her share of the booty. Raleigh arrived at Dartmouth to an enthusiastic reception. His poor servants, to the number of 140 good men and all the mariners, came to him with such shouts and joy as I never saw a man more troubled to quiet them in my life. Although Raleigh gave the Queen the lion's share of the spoils, she returned him to the Tower and reinstalled Essex as her favourite. But by now, Raleigh was the leader of the West Country, which was vital to her. She needed Raleigh's influence there. And so, shortly, he was released, and in 1594, banished with his wife to his estate in Sherborne. There, he once more studied and continued to patronize the scientific work of others, such as Thomas Harriot and John Dee. In isolation, Raleigh resumed his plans for an expedition to Guyana. He had first heard of this coastal country from a captured Spaniard some years before. It was thought by some to be where the legendary city of El Dorado was located. Be this as it may, Raleigh suspected it was rich in the gold mines which the Spanish had been unable to locate elsewhere. As the Spanish had not yet placed full garrisons there, he put together a fleet of 4 ships and set out in 1596. On reaching Trinidad, Raleigh attacked the town of St. Joseph, burned it and slaughtered the inhabitants. the Spanish governor, Antonio de Berrio, was taken prisoner. The native chiefs, whom the Spanish had chained and tortured, were released, thus ensuring their help. On hearing that Raleigh wanted to explore Guyana, the governor did his best to dissuade him. Raleigh courteously ignored him and sailed up the Orinoco. The conditions were difficult.
We were all driven to lie in the rain and weather, in the open air and the burning sun, and upon raw hard boards, and to dress our metre and to carry all manner of furniture in them, wherewith they were so pestered and unsavoury that what with victuals being mostly fish, with wet clothes of so many people thrust together and the heat of the sun, I will undertake there was never any prison in England that could be found more unsavoury and loathsome, especially to myself, who had been for many years been dieted and cared for in a sort far more differing.
Yet once free of the forest, the beauty of the land more than compensated for these hardships.
Whereas all that we had seen before was nothing but woods, prickles, bushes and thorns, here we beheld plains of 20 miles in length, the grass short and green, and in divers parts groves of trees by themselves, as if they had been, by all the art and labour in the world, so made of purpose. And still, as we rode, the deer came down, feeding by the water's side, as if they had been used to a keeper's call. Upon this river there were great store of fowl of many sorts, and of divers sorts of strange fishes, of marvellous designs. When we ran to the tops of the first hills of the plains adjoining the river, we beheld that wonderful breach of waters which ran down Caroline, and might from that mountain see the river, how it ran, in 3 parts. And there appeared some 10 or 12 waterfalls in sight, every one as high over the other as a church tower, which fell with that fury that the rebound of waters made it seem as if they had all been covered over with a great shower of rain. And in some places we took it at the first for a smoke that had risen over some great town.
Throughout the voyage, Raleigh treated the natives with honour and respect. Like Drake, he instinctively understood that by winning the hearts of the natives, his task could be made easier. In the Savannah country, he befriended Chief Tipperary. The chief told him that El Dorado lay far across the country, but the rainy season was coming, and Raleigh decided to go back to England. He promised the Indians the Queen's protection, but assured them that he would return. On his return, empty-handed, Raleigh was accused of theft, deceit, fraud, and, unofficially, treason. In reply, he wrote his account of the trip titled,
The discovery of the large, rich and beautiful empire of Guyana, with a relation of the great golden city of Manoa.
It was a stunning work which combined the real and the imaginary to create a powerful myth. Its publication made Raleigh's name legendary in the land as the man who added Guyana to the English colonies. Sadly, Queen Elizabeth remained skeptical, and anyway, she had other business to attend to. Fearing that Spain was amassing another armada, the Queen assembled a fleet of nearly 124 ships to raid the Spanish coasts. Raleigh was recalled to command one of the 4 squadrons in the Queen's ship Warspite. His rival Essex commanded another squadron. Most of the work of applying the ships and pressing men fell to Raleigh,
dragging in the mire, from alehouse to alehouse in the seaports.
He found the task difficult. As a result of the Guyana expedition, he had lost money. He was also now, although only 43 years old, physically weakened by his travels. Finally, in June 1596, the fleet set sail. The 4 squadron leaders argued constantly but quickly reached Cadiz. Cadiz was defended by huge galleons, called the 4 Apostles, 3 frigates, and 20 galleys. After an attack led by Essex failed, Raleigh put forward his own plan and persuaded the other commanders to follow it. He led the second assault himself in the Warspite and panicked the Spanish. Every galleon was burned. Thousands of Spaniards died. In his account of the burning of the Spanish ships, Raleigh wrote,
"The Earl hath behaved himself, I protest to you by the living God, both valiantly and advisedly in the highest degree, without pride, without cruelty, and hath gotten great humour and much love of all."
The Queen, out of pocket as a result of the poor spoils, was not convinced. But after 5 years in disgrace, Raleigh was returned to his position in court as Captain of the Guard. In 1597, a second English expedition sailed. This time it was led by Essex, with Raleigh as a squadron leader. Its aim was to destroy Armada ships in Ferrol and Corunna and intercept the Spanish treasure fleet. But gales damaged the ships and blew them back to port. When it put out again, the fleet was divided by bad weather, and the old rivalry between Essex and Raleigh returned. Essex sailed on to lay an ambush for the Spanish without waiting for Raleigh. When Raleigh arrived at Fayal, the rendezvous point, he was fired upon by the Spanish garrison there. But Essex's men refused to attack without word from Essex. Finally, after a water-finding party was fired upon, Raleigh led a small force of 250 men against the town and took it in a fierce and courageous action. When Essex returned empty-handed to find Raleigh had taken a town single-handed, he almost court-martialed him. Essex then moved on to the port of Angra, on the island of Terceira, where the treasure fleet was expected. There he made the mistake of leaving a small guard of ships at the harbour entrance and impatiently sailing off in search of other prizes. When the fleet arrived, it brushed the guard aside and was soon safely in the well-protected harbour. Essex attempted to blockade Angra, but he changed his mind continually, often forgetting to tell his commanders. Each of his exploits failed, and in October, the fleet returned to England. By the time of the fleet's return, a fresh armada had sailed from Ferrol. Raleigh and Essex were ordered to organize land defences, but bad weather dispersed the Spanish ships. In this moment of emergency, the fiasco of Essex's expedition was forgotten. But afterwards, the Queen acknowledged Essex's weakness of character and judgment. Not only was he a poor commander, in his vanity, he did not even mention Raleigh's success in his official report. Also, at the age of 31, Essex was living beyond his means and tired of kowtowing to the Queen. When a relation of Raleigh's was preferred to one of his own for the command of the next Irish expedition, he lost his temper and openly insulted the Queen. Believing that she was dependent on his support, Essex formed a personal army of 2,000 men and used it to interrupt the Queen's birthday celebrations. It was his way of showing her his power in the face of Raleigh, her overpowered captain of the guard. To calm Essex, the Queen made him commander in Ireland. He left parading with the biggest army ever taken there through the streets of London. But once in Ireland, His incompetence brought in poor results. In fact, he lost his reputation as a soldier. For a time, it was seriously feared that he would march his army on England. But in 1599, he deserted his post and returned to England alone. There, he burst into the Queen's bedchamber, raving that Raleigh was plotting to betray England to Spain. He was arrested and placed in the Tower for a year.
If you take it for good counsel to relent towards this tyrant, you will repent it when it shall be too late. His malice is fixed and will not evaporate.
But Essex was released. He immediately began to plot against the Queen. At Essex's trial, one of his fellow conspirators, Sir Christopher Blunt, made a confession. The accusations against Raleigh, he said, had been invented to deceive Essex. Essex was executed. Raleigh, as captain of the guard, was present. When his presence angered Essex's friends, he withdrew and watched from a window instead. There, his enemies claimed, he smoked tobacco and laughed. But after the execution, Raleigh wrote,
What is our life? A play of passion? And what our mirth? Music of division. Our mother's wombs the tiring houses be, where we are dressed for this short comedy. Heaven the judicious, sharp spectator is, who sits and marks what here we do amiss. The graves that hide us from the searching sun are like drawn curtains when the play is done. Thus, playing post, we too our latest rest, and then we die, in earnest, not in jest.
Many men hated Raleigh, blaming him for Essex's downfall. But the court of Queen Elizabeth was alive with intrigue and politics. The Queen had always defended her position by playing one adviser off against another. This was something Raleigh understood, and Essex, to his cost, did not. But Raleigh's cleverest rival at court was the small, hunchbacked Secretary of State, Sir Robert Cecil, and he understood something that Raleigh did not. For a long time, Cecil had been secretly meeting with ambassadors from the Scottish King James. The Queen was old, and without an heir, James's succession looked likely. But the King wanted to strengthen his position. However, Raleigh refused to meet these ambassadors. He knew that James favoured friendly relations with Spain, a country which represented all that he hated. As captain of the guard, he remained loyal to the Queen alone. Cecil took advantage of this to suggest that only he could prevent Raleigh opposing James' succession. During this period, Raleigh continued to be fully involved in public life as a Member of Parliament. In 1602, he sent another expedition to America. Although it was far too small to form a colony, it reached Cape Cod and set up a base on Cuttyhunk Island. This was the first English contact with New England. Raleigh's far-sightedness was still opening up new opportunities for English traders and settlers. But all his good works would soon count for little. In March 1603, Queen Elizabeth died. Unopposed, partly because of Cecil's planning, King James rode unhurriedly from Edinburgh to assume the throne. As he progressed on his way, many noblemen swore their allegiance to him, but Raleigh did not.
At a consultation at Whitehall after Queen Elizabeth's death, how matters were to be ordered and what ought to be done, Sir Walter Raleigh declared his opinion. 'Twas the wisest way for them to keep the government in their own hands and set up a commonwealth and not be subject to a needy, beggarly nation. Well, it seems there were some of this cabal who kept this not so secret, but that it came to King James' ear, who, where the English noblesse met and received him, being told upon presentment to his majesty their names, when Sir Walter Raleigh's name was told, the king said, "O my soul, man, I have heard Raleigh of thee." But the company was so exceeding numerous that their obedience carried a secret dread with it. Said Sir Walter to him, "Would to God that had been put to the trial." "Why do you wish that?" said the king. "Because," said Sir Walter, "that then you would have known your friends from your foes." For that reason, Sir Walter was never forgotten nor forgiven. Oh, he was such a person every way that, as King Charles I says of Lord Strafford, a prince would rather be afraid of than ashamed of. He had that awfulness and ascendancy and aspect over other mortals.
At first the king appeared to accept Raleigh's allegiance, but he was soon replaced as captain of the guard by a Scot. After that, his privileges were slowly stripped away and his advice, never requested, was ignored. Soon he had lost the wine monopoly which had provided his main income, his Sherborne estate, and his London home. Inevitably, as rumours of plots against the king sprang up, Raleigh was put on trial. Raleigh's behaviour throughout the trial, which so glaringly failed to prove that he was a traitor, impressed many people. Awaiting sentence, Raleigh determined to die bravely. But his resolve was not called upon. King James, aware of Raleigh's popularity, did not execute the death sentence, but left it hanging over Raleigh's head as he languished in the Tower. Now 50 years old, Raleigh accepted his imprisonment and returned to his studies. His wife and child lived with him, and although now partly crippled, he adapted to life in the Tower. He used its grounds to build a laboratory and plant a small garden. He conducted experiments in botany and chemistry, and just as his popularity grew in captivity, So did his reputation as a suspected magician and alchemist. But King James' fear of Raleigh also grew. Although petitions were made for his release, including one by the King of Denmark, James refused. When the gunpowder plot to blow up the Houses of Parliament was discovered in 1605, Raleigh, although clearly innocent of involvement, was nevertheless questioned. During his imprisonment, the work he had begun in North America continued. The Plymouth Company was formed to colonize New England. Another company aimed to settle in Virginia. Meanwhile, a strange relationship grew up. King James' son, Prince Henry, made friends with Raleigh and came to rely on him as his adviser. It was partly as a means of instructing the heir to the throne that Raleigh wrote his History of the World. But in 1612, the prince caught typhoid fever after swimming in the filthy Thames and died. Raleigh left his history unfinished, though it was published shortly afterwards in this form. In 1616 there was a scandal. Robert Carr, the king's favourite, and Lady Frances Howard were found guilty of poisoning and sent to the Tower. Carr had taken advantage of Raleigh's position to steal the Sherborne estate from Raleigh. Lady Frances was the niece of Raleigh's enemy, Lord Henry Howard. During the investigation of the couple, it was discovered that both the Howard family and the now dead Sir Robert Cecil had received pensions from Spain. This was precisely what they had accused Raleigh of. The king took a new favourite, George Villiers, who urged a renewal of hostilities towards Spain. Raleigh immediately wrote to the king, suggesting an expedition to Guyana, which would hurt Spain and pay for itself. After 13 years' imprisonment in the Tower, at the age of 64, grey, lame and malaria-ridden, Raleigh was freed. From the start, the Spanish ambassador, Gondomar, tried to stop the expedition. He claimed that Guyana belonged to Spain and that Raleigh intended to turn pirate and plunder the Spanish Main. As a result of these protests and James' own hatred, Raleigh was denied a free pardon and the words "trusty and well-beloved" were deleted from his commission. And he was, incredibly, made to give a solemn pledge not to set foot on Spanish territory or inflict the least injury upon a Spanish subject. Raleigh took advice as to what he should do. Sir Francis Bacon, among others, suggested that he should go ahead without waiting for a formal pardon. Raleigh heeded this advice. His need for a success in Guyana became public knowledge, and as ever, his enemies, the Spanish not least among them, were determined to make him fail. He embarked in 1617 aboard the Destiny, commanding a squadron of 7 ships. His first stop was at Lanzarote in the Canaries. There, one of his captains, John Bailey, deserted him and returned to England, claiming that Raleigh had turned pirate. Fortunately, a merchant ship captain who had witnessed the desertion then also arrived back in England. Bailey was imprisoned, but Raleigh's misfortunes continued. 42 men died of illness on the outward journey, and Raleigh himself spent a month in a fever. Then, on reaching Guyana and meeting his old native friends, another of his officers, Captain Keames, disobeyed his instructions and led an attack on the town of Santorme. A dispatch captured en route to the Spanish king revealed the frustration of the Spaniards.
Sire, the city of San Tome and the island of Trinidad, of the province of Guyana and Dorado, represented in the past month of January 1618 Walter Raleigh, an English pirate with 10 ships and launches, went up the river Orinoco to the sanctuary of San Tome, 40 leagues from the sea, and at 1 league's distance set on shore 500 men, and the ships went up to its port. The governor, Diego Palomique, who with all his diligence made preparations to defend it with the few soldiers he had, attacked him with very great valour, and as no other plan was available, he engaged him at 11 of the night by way of defending the city, seeing that he lacked men and was without artillery or regular troops. And there the two forces began slaying each other. The enemy then remained in occupation of the place for 29 days, during which period they contrived to their side the peaceful Guiana Indians, situated nearest the town, who straightway rose in rebellion in order to support the enemy.
Raleigh's eldest son was killed in the attack. Later, after his cold reception by Raleigh, Captain Keymes shut himself in his cabin and killed himself. In July 1618, Raleigh's crippled ship reached Plymouth. All but one of his officers, Captain King, had deserted. One of them had already returned and, like Captain Bailey, claimed that Raleigh had turned pirate. Raleigh seems to have hoped to plead for clemency, but soon after his arrival, a proclamation was made for his arrest. Realizing that all hope was gone, he planned to escape to France with Captain King's help. But he was betrayed by Sir Lewis Stukely. Society later shunned Stukely for his actions, and he died a raving lunatic. John Aubrey recorded this of Raleigh's execution. These lines Sir Walter Raleigh wrote in his Bible the night before he was beheaded, and desired his relations with these words, viz., beg my dead body, which living is denied to you, and bury it either in Sherborne or Exeter Church. A scaffold was erected in the old palace yard, upon which, after 14 years' reprievement, his head was cut off. At which time such abundance of blood issued from his veins that showed he had stock of nature enough to have continued him many years in life, though now above 80 years old, if it had not been taken away by the hand of violence. And this was the great Sir Walter Raleigh, great sometimes in the favour of Queen Elizabeth, and next to Sir Francis Drake, the great scourge and hate of the Spaniards. Oh, he had many things to be commended in his life, but none more than his constancy at his death, which he took with so undaunted a resolution that one might perceive he had a certain expectation of a better life after it. On the famous Sir Walter Raleigh, who fell a sacrifice to Spanish politics, here lieth, hidden in this pit, the wonder of the world for wit. It to small purpose did him serve, his wit could not his life preserve. He living was beloved of none, yet in his death all did him moan. Heaven hath his soul, the world his fame, the grave his corpse, Stukely his shame. And so died Sir Walter Raleigh. Yet even in death his legend was strengthened. his name became an inspiration to explorers and scholars alike. Today, almost 300 years later, Raleigh's undaunted spirit of adventure continues to strike a deep chord within the popular imagination. The age of discovery was giving way to the age of empire. Sir Walter Raleigh, the last great Elizabethan, became in death what he had been in life, the yardstick by which to measure an Englishman's courage, the mark against which to test his ambition.